I want to call to order the March 14th, 2019 meeting of the Century Parish Strategic Planning Committee. The only member that's not here is Committee Chair Oliver Joseph. He's across the river with another meeting, and we have sitting in for him, we have Councilwoman Chair Terry Cazzo, and we have Visiting Councilman Bill Dawson. Would everyone please stand for the prayer? Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to serve the people of Ascension. Let our thoughts and our deeds be within our heart and representative of the people that we represent, that have given us this great opportunity. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There'll be no chair additions. Public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak on an agenda item, please sign with the Secretary, Jessica, and she'll get it up here to us, and we'll get you up when we have that agenda item up. Agenda item number 5, approval of the February 18th, 2019 Strategic Planning Committee minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Mr. Todd Lambert, second by Mr. John Cagnolotti. Any objection? Any discussion? That motion carries. We'll move on to agenda item number 6. Do we have a speaker? Yes. We have a speaker, Miss Catherine Goppin.
Good evening, council members.
Hi.
Good to see y'all. Drainage is the second priority on the minds of Ascension Parish residents, traffic congestion being the first. After the 2016 flood, even more so, citizens expect that you will do all in your power to mitigate the next event. Let me address the drainage impact study policy. My first and greatest concern is the statement at the end of this policy, and I quote, "Some of the requirements of the drainage impact study may be omitted on a case-by-case basis to be determined at the discretion of the engineer review agency if the developer/subdivider can show that the proposed development will not adversely affect the existing downstream drainage system," end quote. This quote is a giant loophole to the mitigating action that you're trying to propose to require developers to make when they work with the land, and so they won't adversely affect other property owners. Such discretionary power should not be allowed. I would highly encourage you or recommend you to remove this from the language in the study. Second, I'd like you to consider the fact that a policy is not code, nor is it legally binding. Those who are overseeing the process can change policy in any administration. We should not leave this important aspect of development, how drainage on the surrounding properties will be affected, with such ambiguity or uncertainty. Your adoption to the use of the 25-year rain event for development rather than a 10-year event is a step in the right direction, and I want to thank you for that. This code that we're talking about tonight in, I think it's Appendix 5, does not apply to agricultural operations, construction in industrial facilities, or soil movement and grading when confined to post-construction of a single-family dwelling for grading of driveways, patios, swimming pools, or similar homeowner site improvements, as long as the soil movement does not significantly alter existing drainage conditions from or adjacent to the site or violate field mitigation requirements. Now, I had a question on this one, and I'm sure you had some questions, and maybe you've already discussed it with among yourselves. As a property owner in the parish, I'm reading this, will this affect the ability of any homeowner to place fill on their property once the residence is occupied? How much land in Ascension is below the base flood elevation? You are using this particular item to determine how much fill should be placed or not placed. This question is related to the determining criteria subject to fill requirements. In 1750-91, related to variances, these can be given upon approval by any of the following: appropriate drainage district director, the director of public works, and the Office of Planning and Development. Such variances give more flexibility to disregard the language of the code. Another loophole. How can this be addressed? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We have no other speakers on that.
Nope. Well,
Everyone has had a copy of the limit of floodplain management field. We'll take a look, revisions to Appendix 5, the drainage. Sir?
we apologize, Mr. Chairman, we had in the sidebar that was appropriate in nature but inappropriate while you were talking.
Correct on both. Thank you.
Thank you.
So here we are. We have HMTB, Melissa here, and her folks to explain their recommendations. Melissa, could you come up for a minute? Thank you very much. We appreciate the recommendations coming forward within a timely manner as requested. Jerome with the planning and zoning and the administration. I think we had a pretty thorough review of what was recommended. Based on my personal review and several members of the committee as they reviewed it, we have a few minor changes that we would like to reflect, but it's verbiage, it's not changes in the recommendations. So, Mr. Sadler, would you like to lead off on this? As we don't have a motion or second.
No, I don't.
We want to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't mind leading off at all. I don't know how many rounds we're going to have or even is needed this evening. I would just like to report to the committee that I did meet, I guess, for a little over 5 hours with the gentleman to my right, to your left out there in the audience, Councilman Dawson. As a point of order, he's not a member of this committee. I think everybody realizes that, but nonetheless, we have in the past with Mr. Lawler and others allowed them to come up to the dais as long as I understand from legal he doesn't motion and vote, he could discuss, and so.
We go with that, sir. I got the meeting.
I hope he really, but I hope he really speaks out, because a lot of the changes we came up aren't just mine. Some were mine, some were his, and the reason I did that long-winded introduction is some are both of us. So here goes. And before getting to that, I'd first like to go to the one public speaker we had tonight and see if we can answer the two glaring parts of our question. Ms. Gupple just spoke and said that she believes the very last sentence in our drainage impact study, soon to be hopefully not policy anymore but procedure, is a giant loophole, quote unquote. And I know when I met with Councilman Dawson, I did also question, is this needed? Because what it does is, as Ms. Gupple said, so we came upon this independently. The Engineering Review Agency, too, have discretionary authority versus, and throughout the document elsewhere, more times than not, I think Councilman Dawson, without trying to put words in his mouth, because I do want to hear him speak tonight, we felt more like letting the laws be the laws as opposed to all these special cases. So my question would be, and I don't even know, Mr. Chairman, who it's to, perhaps Mr. Jerome Fournier or anyone else, or yourself, Melissa, why do we need this case-by-case basis examination with the discretionary authority of our ERA to decide that even though we got all these laws, that if our ERA doesn't believe and the developer doesn't believe there's no adverse effect on existing downstream drainage, we can just proceed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call up Mr. Sean Chiro, who's our engineering review agency, and he can answer that question, right?
Yes, Sean, thank you.
All right, thank you all. So I believe that the question is, why would we need that?
There's always a question there somewhere, Sean. I apologize.
Yeah, I know.
there.
Sometimes I feel like the setup is necessary because I want people to know that my questions are all in earnest.
Right. Just my experience of seeing drainage study policies, multiple parishes, there's typically this type of statement in there because you imagine having a hard, fast rule on every single application of it is just, it's unreasonable. A lot of time, then you're always coming back. Do I have to go back to the council to say, can I ask a waiver to have to submit a drainage study? You know, and so you're constantly bringing more cases back to either planning commission or the council saying, I'm asking for a waiver officially. And they're like, what for? Well, here's my situation. I had a shed. I wanted to move it. Technically, it's this. I don't want to have a surveyor to say approve any floodplain field mitigation. I'm already out of the flood zone. It's a weird situation. I'm like, you know, I'm asking for it to be exempted from doing that part of the drainage study and not everything else. And so all of those little variances is the reason why this little statement's at the end. You just need to have, I guess, the trust in your ERA, your planning commission, the staff, the ones that you're hiring to review, Department of Public Works, your drainage engineer, that they really stick their foot down, and that should be the exception, which is historically, I don't know if any time that anyone has gone through the effort to say, can you please waive all of these things from the drainage study. There's been some things, you do have some waivers in your ordinance right now already. And there's a lot of things that are exempted from even doing the whole thing. So the concept of waivers, waiving some things, is already in your ordinance. You're looking at one last sentence in the policy. If that's the attitude we want, or direction we want to go in the policy, we need to also go back into the ordinance and ignore some of those things. But then you're going to be having a lot of cases come before you all probably at a council meeting saying, I'm requesting a waiver to do a drainage study, or I'm requesting not to have to do this, and then you all will have to say, let's get our drainage engineers up here to see is this reasonable, and it's not making things, in my opinion, it's the proper use of the council and planning commission's time. East Baton Rouge is very similar to this. They also have exemptions, exceptions in their ordinance. You know, regardless of the process, they also have it in their ordinance. So I guess a quick way to summarize, it's common practice.
Yeah, I got just a quick question is that,
Yes.
you know, so it's two ways to look at this, and sometimes I look at it the same way that Ms. Goppel looks at it. We have built-in ways for people to request variances and to request little subtle changes and things, as long as they're appeasable and they don't hurt anyone. Right. But when at the end, sometimes we look at this as like I call it, because I have contracts in front of me all the time, as the general disclaimer. You know what I mean? So does this allow the engineering review agency or the administration to abort the rules of this ordinance? That's the question.
My response is, first, policy does not trump ordinance. Ordinance says you cannot have adverse impact to.
One second. I'm gonna go ahead and correct
Okay.
it. There's gonna be a recommendation coming to take the word policy off. Okay.
Well,
This is going to be an ordinance, sir.
Ordinance. We're looking
Yeah.
for something to go forward to, and it's coming out of committee tonight, or if it does. But I mean, the goal is it comes out of committee. It's going to the council. It's gonna have some hearings.
Okay.
That was Ms. Couples' second question, and it's a point well taken.
Yeah.
I got to respond whenever we're
Yeah,
ready
that's
for that one,
what,
too.
as we reviewed it yesterday, and
Unless you want.
I was with them, so, we want something coming forward that's a rule, okay?
Sure.
Not a suggestion, okay? So go ahead and
Yes.
tell me what you was
Well,
gonna tell me.
I would advise you, this whole ordinance and policy that you would use the common word policy for right now, if you don't mind. The way this was presented was assuming that the drainage policy items would be considered a policy. There needs to be, we're mentioning things in this policy about HECRAS river stations.
Okay,
That's an engineering tool, okay? Who knows what that program's gonna be called or what the proper tool is next year? Do we want to go back to
Yes.
the council and say, this one
Yes.
HECRAS, we want this new tool by, whoever it is, and not using the term river stations, are we really following the ordinance? Most places have ordinances, like what are your key governing criteria? You keep that ordinance. That is the foundation of your drainage ordinance. No adverse impact. 25-year storm to a 10-year pre-developed. Upstream, fill mitigation. Those are your foundation. The flexibility, the engineering of how I want you to present in the drainage study, how when you analyze it, where you put your cross sections, where you put your stations, how do you account for tailwater? Is it a rating curve? Those technical terms grow in time, and so that's typically what the policy, this was drafted intended to show you how you're meeting the requirements of the ordinance. If we were to make this into ordinance, it takes away a whole lot of flexibility on how we are showing that we're meeting, I call that governing criteria of the ordinance. It's almost
Mr.
like if you had a building checklist submittal to go submit
We got it,
plans
we got it.
to the agency, but you live by the code, whatever the building code is, and then you grab our internal checklist. I mean, you can go to our website and see how much that, we have a new person comes in, what they need submittal for the checklist. The fire marshal first, fire marshal second. We view the policies more as a checklist to show us how you're meeting the governing key criteria of the ordinance. And so I would just suggest, if this policy goes to be added as part of the ordinance, there's a whole lot more sections that have to be reworded and revised, because now we have duplications of the key criteria. And there's some things that we want to add some flexibility. Instead of using HEC-RAS, we might say HEC-RAS or other equivalent tool.
Mr. Chairman, may I address his multiple comments since I sort of had the floor, and maybe some other people have other questions as well?
Yeah.
Is that correct procedure?
Yeah, I'll give you the floor back, Doc.
Appreciate that. Let me start here. You say, Mr. Sherrill, others have it, and it reminds me of my mother when I was young, God bless her soul. I was oftentimes jealous of a little neighbor boy by the name of Frankie that lived down the block, and she would always tell me, if Frankie jumps off the bridge, that don't mean you might want to jump off the bridge. I personally have become over the years hardened, battle-tested, and tired of because other people do it, that's a really good reason. Number two, you don't want to lock, I captured us into the letter of the law. I totally disagree with that, unless you can give me some real specific examples. I'd much rather, and that's going to segue to number three, let the developer who's upset or whatever because he and you could not get together and decide we're going to throw certain rules out and just decide differently than what the law states. An example I'd give there, a specific example on my side of the argument would be speeding. The limit says 65. How much discretion do you want to give? In my opinion, the speed limit should be changed long before we sit here and decide, well, it's okay, because I'm a police officer that thinks 60 is okay, 55 is okay, excuse me, let's go in the other direction, 70 is okay, 75 is okay, and so forth. You mentioned HECRIS and changes, and as you can see, Mr. Dawson and I have discussed this in extent Monday in that 5.5-hour session we had. I believe as a lawmaker that we should make laws for what we have, not what may be. And we fully realize that that and many other things may be the flavor of the month right now. It won't be later. That's fine. That's when we come and amend our law. As opposed to worrying about the council doing a whole lot more work. I wouldn't worry about that as much as it when they come in and argue for the variance, we would have you to tell us that yes, you should agree with them or no, you shouldn't. Then just let you make that decision, which is number 4 in my argument. If we let the ERA grant waivers of variances without us involved, that variance would never come to us. We would never see it. How would I ever know and be able to answer to my constituents that it was acceptable? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I can go to the next issue of Ms. Guppel's comments or down in the document, or you might want to let Mr. Sherrill or whatever have a rebuttal.
Well, I think Mr. Sherrill gave you, he gave you his recommendations, and that's.
Yeah, I just want to point, obviously.
I don't know.
We're here,
I don't think he's aware
we
of it.
work for.
Right.
We're working for you.
That's what I'm
We're
saying.
exactly what you want.
Right.
I just feel
haven't heard
that
a word out of him.
if I feel, from the ERA perspective and also doing similar type work that Melissa's doing for other parishes, that I've seen have gone down certain paths and they're going back and forth. I just feel it's worthwhile for me to point out
Yes,
some of the challenges. Sometimes you get unintended side, side effects when you change one thing or you make some ironclad. So I'm just
Yes.
pulling those out, but we'll obviously do.
So, Mr. Chair, we should
What you
handle
wanted
this
to
on a
do.
case-by-case basis. This is in front of us right now. The question is, does
Yeah.
it stay in this
Yeah.
policy soon to be hopefully law?
Yeah.
Or does it come out either way?
Yeah.
Do we want this ability for the ERA or don't we? And that's something I think tonight, before we get to any final vote that we're gonna pass this on to the
Right.
committee or defer it or whatever, we have to handle before we go to a new topic.
Yeah, and I just want to restate that Mr. Giroux just given us his recommendations. That's what we hired him for. Ms. Cazzo.
Yes, Melissa, can I ask for you to please share your thoughts on this?
Okay, I was going to say, I agree with Sean on this, because I do know that there are cases where things come up that just don't seem to fit the mold of fitting into a drainage impact study. And I do believe that they are looking out for the parish's interest in evaluating what is submitted and what requirements are required. And I don't, again, we're not talking every development and whatnot. He's talking about very rare cases where somebody might request a variance on a part of it. And the other thing is, I just want to say on the impact policy, again, that the drainage impact policy is specifically, or a drainage impact study policy is specifically in regards to development and the requirements for when somebody has to submit a drainage impact study. So that does not necessarily apply to like the individual homeowner. So that's why it's kind of also separate, because it's a document on, again, criteria and how to meet the intent of the ordinance. So,
Yes, Ms. Cazzo.
Follow-up, if I may. Thank you for that. Is there a way to have, you have to get a variance on this issue? I mean, can we narrow this? I mean, if the concern is that it's being used too frequently and at the risk of the citizens of our parish, is there a way to put some limitations on this case-by-case basis that would make us feel more comfortable?
in addition, okay, so, because right now it says, will not adversely affect the existing downstream drainage system. You're saying, can we put more stringent language in there besides just that criteria?
Well, I think that's, I'm not sure that's what I'm asking. I mean, I
Because-
apologize.
Well,
And
that's okay. No, it's a complicated thing, and.
It is
and-
complicated.
and
That's why we're
again-
here tonight,
That's
to
right.
deliberate.
And again,
That's right.
it's not, we're not allowing really deviations from the ordinance. If there's a detention pond required, we're still gonna require to meet the requirements for that. If fill mitigation is required, we're still gonna make sure they meet the requirements for that. So those types of things are not, they're not
So could
varied
we
or
add
waived.
that language, that there'll be no deviation from these things, but there can be some, and if it's anything other than this, you have to go to the council to have
How
any kind
about,
of.
one suggestion would be sort of what I was discussing earlier. If we reword that to the way, some of the requirements of the drainage impact study or policy may be omitted, case by case, whatever, situation, at the discretion of the ERA or whatever it is, with, as long, I don't know how to word it, right now on the spot, but saying, as long as, that's what I was referring to, there is sufficient information provided, to show that, those items might be as long as they're in accordance with the drainage ordinance. The drainage, where I said is the big, no adverse impact, the fill mitigation, detention, whatever those items are. Maybe we just say if they can be waived as long as the, professional engineer can certify that it's still meeting the intent of the drainage ordinance. Something similar
I
to
would
that.
be more comfortable with a list of things that can be waived and a list of things, or a list of things that can't. I think that would make me feel more comfortable, because I find this kind of loophole-ish too. So while I understand your explanation, and I do, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I kind of get what you're saying. I would just like to see us, how do we tighten it up, even if it's a list of things that cannot be done without certain other things having been done?
Okay, all right, well, just keep in mind, your drainage ordinance applies, I always call it snowball stand. There's no cutoff point, so you really do want to put a snowball stand on a quarter
Okay,
acre
give me
site.
some examples.
But that
Okay.
won't require.
They would require,
Oh, yes, it
they
does,
would
because-
require pre-developed map, post-developed drainage map, a watershed map. possibly HECRAS analysis, on-site capacities for a 100-year storm event for a snowball stand on a quarter-acre lot. That's where, because we don't have a cutoff point for commercial property for Ascension Parish, that's why some of these flexibility based on your size, say that there was already an existing
address
gravel
that.
parking lot,
Right.
I want to bring in a snowball stand, so what applies to me? That's where some of that discretion comes in, the flexibility.
So could we address those things elsewhere in an effort to close this loophole, son?
I agree with you some, but Jerome, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah,
Based
I just
on what
wanted to
we're
mention
talking
that
about?
in my tenure as planning director, almost 3 years now, I have never seen a waiver come across our desk that tries to exempt a project from a drainage study that's of a major category, even a minor category, all right? It might have been a shed in the backyard, something like that, that Sean described, but that is it. Everybody else has had to comply with this, and Sean does the job. He tells them what they need to do and how it needs to be applied. So I have never seen one come across my desk that says that you're going to be exempt from a drainage study.
Yeah, and I just want to caution everybody, because we're the ones that's going to vote on it, about building bureaucracy to that point. Because every one of us got people that have small businesses and things like that. So,
Mr. Chairman.
yes, Mr. Sadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Sean, and thank you, Melissa, again. I gave 4 reasons. Let me add 2 or 3 more now that you've spoke. So I guess this is a rebuttal to the rebuttal. You talk about adding language like, if there's sufficient information. Well, you've heard me speak in public before what I believe about, and later on you're going to see, Bill and I came up a lot of times, if this is significant. I'm a scientist. I know what significant means statistically tested to 95 versus 99% probability level, but that don't happen in government. And as far as sufficient information is concerned, well, unfortunately, I've been divorced, probably a lot of people in this room, and the courts always grant reasonable visitation rights. I assure you, what's reasonable to her is not reasonable to him, and that's not because
vice
it's
versa.
acrimony between, and vice versa. Thank you, Terry. Thank you. And that's the whole point. The vice versa is important. And so, the child becomes victimized, of course, and is held child supportments against the visitation, et cetera. I mean, that's why I had a judge once telling me there's acrimony between the couple, so how can there be reasonable visitation rate? So I don't like significant or any language added. I would ask you this. I used to teach an awareness piece in my multicultural diversity training days, which was entitled Walk in My Shoes. I'm trying to walk in your shoes, but I'd ask you to walk in mine. This case is, to me, tonight, very similar to what we have seen with our contingencies issue, which is under Attorney General opinion review right now. Prior to that, through my committee on strategic planning, you remember the appeals board, which was eliminated because they don't answer. President appointed these people to us, et cetera. So it's the argument that when you put yourself in my shoes, and not just our shoes, all the people up here and the other, what do we have here tonight? 5 members that aren't present, okay? We're responsible directly to our constituents, not to, okay, the administration or the ERA. And personally, I'd rather see you bring these, especially since you just said they're rare and hardly don't exist. I don't think we'll be burdening us much at all. Bring them to us if it's a snowball stand or whatever. I'm ready to hear that. I don't think it's a real problem. I know everybody in the world wants to protect their turf. I've seen it over and over and over again. The real question is the turf, and you've just all said, worth protecting? Is there a better way where we can answer directly? What we need in this parish, said it multiple times in the last 7 years, is trust of the people. And I think that's why Ms. Gupple got up and had the nerve and audacity to tell us tonight this is a giant loophole. And I've heard a few councilmen just kind of use that word and said, I think it might be a little loophole either. I'll be stronger. It's a loophole. And if it ain't, that's fine. But in the viewpoint of the public, where we're trying to build this trust, that's what y'all got to recognize. It's a loophole. I'd much rather tell my constituents, okay, that we fought to get rid of the ability of individuals, and we would never see the case. That's the other issue I brought up. Let's remind you of that. Of the ERA or anybody to cure X, Y, and Z to make this decision, which I think finally should rest within the law of which this council passes. And I thank everyone for listening.
Yeah, and I just want to throw it from a constituent's point of view is you know, we've got to answer the questions is, well, how can they do that over there and I was turned down? Okay,
There you go.
and that's the
Number
simple
6 or
point of view.
7.
That's the simple point of view. You know, I tried to do this and I didn't meet the requirements and I'm just a regular old guy, but they want to, you know, all kind of studies and things and want me to pay, you know, $1,000 for engineering to just do this in my backyard. And, you know, these people over here, they done built up land 5 feet and did all this and hell, they never even had to go for a permit. We're
Good for the
trying to
goose, good for the
close.
gander.
So I'm gonna continue to try to keep it simple on what it could possibly look at. I agree with you that a lot of times when we put constraints and tight constraints, that we're gonna find out within 2 months that this one line, this one word does not work. And I hate to burden the administration, planning and zoning, or the engineering reviewing folks, which everybody gets paid to do their job. But if it's not right, when we leave here, we got several more times to change this before it becomes law, okay? But this same question, leaves out of this committee tonight, the same question is gonna be asked when it goes to council for review. Same question is gonna be asked when it goes to the public. And I use the word, the general disclaimer, but given the contractual things, it gives you the ability to work with people, okay? So I don't wanna stop you working with the guy that wants to open a snowball stand on the corner in Santamar, okay? But I also do not wanna give the ability for somebody that can afford $100,000 in legal fees, $200,000 in engineering fees to be able to circumvent and get something done that the average person couldn't get done. Do y'all see my drift here? So I don't know where the middle ground is, whether this statement goes away completely or whether it's adjusted. And we set the path that we're gonna have to continually make little small changes. Oh, we ran up on this, we ran up on that. Hell, I might be the council member that's calling Jerome saying, hey, you know, I talked to so-and-so, they can't do this. Well, you know what? You just passed this law 2 months ago, okay? So this is what you did, all right? So we're gonna continue to learn and educate. But, you know, there's been a push on this to try to get something pretty solid in place that's equal. That all citizens are being treated equal within the rules and regulations we got. And I know the scope of the project changes a lot of things. The shed in the backyard or the snowball stand's not gonna affect the things that a major subdivision does. But I agree with all points here. So we gotta find some common ground. Right now, I'm gonna let Mr. Bill Dawson, you want to speak, sir? Go ahead.
I have a quick question, and I want to make one comment, if permission. Jerome, had you told me earlier that this is already codified in Article 4?
Yeah, I wanted to state that. If you go to our subdivision code, which is Appendix 4 of the subdivision regulations, it's called the subdivision regulations, and you go to item I have to find the above reference on that. Let me just find it, 17405I. That section of the report of the subdivision code states, the Department of Public Works and the Engineering Review Agency shall require a subdivider to provide a drainage impact study and a traffic impact study in the form and substance as provided in Appendix 4, Section 8 for a proposed preliminary plan, and to require a conclusion and plan that offsets any adverse impact to the development that the development may have on the drainage system of the roads, traffic of the parish of Ascension. So basically, if you go to our section of the code and you go to Appendix 4, Section 8, you will see the two policies there. One is the traffic impact policy, and the other is the drainage impact policy. So they are referenced, and they are part of the ordinance.
So how long
by
has this
reference.
been codified? Years? I mean, if it's
well,
published in there, I would assume it's been
Yeah.
codified for quite some time. So,
I don't know the
you know,
duration, but yeah.
Obviously, it hasn't harmed us before. Then one other comment, which
if you look at section 17503, and there are 5 exceptions to what's the requirement for this drainage impact study. So there are 5 different paragraphs that are full of exceptions. So I'll just read you some of them that are in number 4, which is the construction, improvement, relocation of accessory buildings such as carports, sheds, barns, pool houses, recreational vehicle storage sheds, and other outbuildings constructed by the homeowner for his or her personal use and not for commercial business purposes. So I think what Sean is saying is that the snowball stand is a commercial deal, but if we're talking about sheds or outbuildings, they're already exempt from this, so we don't need a variance for that.
Right.
And I shouldn't give my opinion, but we
Well,
thought
you were supposed to give your opinion.
we
What is
thought
your
this
opinion,
that the variances are not necessary. That we have 5 paragraphs with exceptions, and if there's some other specific thing that we need to exempt, then let's add it in one of these 5 paragraphs.
Spell it out.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
You finished, Bill?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
thank you. I want to be sure, in Appendix 4, Mr. Fournier, Section 8, I had it in front of me right now, and I don't. We were dealing with 5 tonight in drainage impact study policy. It is your testimony that the drainage impact study policy, before we altered it tonight, even its name to procedure, whatever's going to happen, did it exist, as in our packets tonight, verbatim in Appendix 4, Section 8? Yes or no?
It will.
Well, not the version that you have in front of you tonight. That's a revised
But the
version.
version before
existing-
HNTB's recommendations are Mr. Dawson's or mine?
The existing policy as it's being used, which is 2 pages long,
Right.
is in that section, right?
Okay, the current policy's about, I don't know, 7 or 8 pages long, so that's a
Right.
little troubling unless the font size are different, or,
Well,
I don't know how to, I'm just saying.
No.
I want to be sure before I make the
What-
motion I'm going to make.
what
okay?
I'm saying, Councilman Satterley, is that we have an existing drainage study policy.
Correct.
And that drainage study policy is approximately 2 pages long.
What you're saying is
And that
codified.
policy exists in that appendix.
What you're saying is codified. Because in the past, Miss Melissa, bless her heart, and I think she has stood up there and kind of looked at me like, what is he talking about when I keep talking about Unified Land Development Code, addressing both drainage impact study, policy, procedure, whatever we can eventually call this,
Right.
and floodplain management, FMP, which to me is more Appendix 5. And I frankly, when Bill and I were meeting, I had an epiphany right after he left and before Chairman Kluot. And I want to thank both of them for giving up their valuable time to be there to discuss this, because this is so ever important. But it was this. Why am I, as a councilman, a lawmaker, even looking at policy in-house if it's not law? And then I looked at it and I'm like, wow, it has no section numbers on it. It doesn't have no 17 whatever and, subpart A with G underneath that and 1 and I and double I under that, et cetera. So I immediately told Mr. Dawson, he agreed, I'm going to put words in his or Randy's mouth, we ought to append this appendix and put this as an appendix somewhere in 5, and now you're telling us you don't even need to do that, it's in 4. So it's
already
law,
in there.
it's law already, with whatever changes we make to it tonight.
Right.
Now, the next question I'd have then, before I make this motion,
If
is there any particular reason why it's not in Appendix 5 or in 4?
well, because
Since 5 deals with the subject of drainage?
It is.
It's mentioned, but it's not appended to appendix or in appendix. It's a separate, it's referred to as the policy.
Yes, it's
Right.
referred to.
And that was the other tip-off, by the way, in my epiphany. When I looked at it, every time Melissa, being as careful and fastidious as she obviously is, the word policy would be inserted in red. But other times, the word policy was already in black. And I went, oh, that means the word's already there, and she's just cleaning it up for when it's not there to be sure everybody knows what we're talking about. So, with that, Mr. Chairman, I would make the motion that we strike the very last sentence where it begins, some of the requirements of the drainage impact study may be omitted on a case-by-case basis, da-da-da, determined by discretion of the engineering review agency, from, as a preliminary vote to whatever we finally agree upon as a product to recommend from this committee to the full council.
So you're asking to
Strike the sentence.
strike the paragraph?
Well, it's one sentence.
Yeah, well, yeah,
A sentence doesn't make a paragraph, but I didn't write it.
thank you.
That's
Thank you.
that's a grammatical issue.
Thank you for that English lesson there.
You're welcome.
So you wanted the whole thing,
That one
That
sentence,
one
that
sentence.
whole thing, yes, sir.
okay?
And I'm looking for a second to,
And
so we can have further discussion.
I'll second for the purpose of discussion.
all right, we have a motion to accept the drainage impact policy.
No, my motion is just to strike the sentence from the policy. We're gonna get
Okay.
into some of the
All
other
right.
elements.
Okay,
There's so much to do tonight.
yeah. Okay, we have a motion to strike the last sentence of the drainage impact study policy. And we have a motion by Mr. Satterley, second by Ms. Cazzo. Discussion. Any opposition?
I'm back to discussion.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
I raised my little hand.
Oh, I didn't see your hand.
So that's okay.
That's all right.
I just want to make sure there's not any way to have, to be more specific, so that we don't lose this. I am not here to make it more expensive for somebody to help their kids open a snowball stand on the corner. I mean, I'm not. That is not what I want to do. Nor to cause it a problem. So are those other, and I don't have access to them in front of me, Bill can show them to me, those other paragraphs he mentions, do those have enough exceptions in it to make this language unnecessary? And will we need to follow up immediately with any little small things that we need to add to those 5? Because I don't want to get caught, I don't want somebody to get caught. It's snowball season, it's not snowball stand season. Okay, thank you. So I don't want to get caught where we are passing something that forces, I mean, my husband had, his first business enterprise was a snowball stand, and the Department of Health shut him down because it didn't have running water. So I don't want to see that happen because we say you got to go get a drainage study to install a snowball stand. So I'm going to review these, if you don't mind, and see if I see where.
There's no commercial exceptions. That's where the snowballs stand.
Right.
They're all residential.
That's correct.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I think
So we need
Sean
to-
had,
So we need to be very careful, is what you're saying to me, that if we strike this, then the snowball stands out without a drainage study. I don't want to put words
that's
in your
what,
mouth.
that's exactly.
Right now, I receive drainage studies for something as small as that. It's just the level of detail for a watershed map,
Right.
a drainage area map, a ditch analysis, a pond water analysis. It's a different level of detail that we do is acceptable to understanding the risk to the downstream neighbors that allows the flexibility in the policy. But they're not exempt from a drainage impact study policy. Like they have to provide a drainage impact study.
Yeah.
The intent of that last note is great in the policy. Some things may be exempted, knowing that verbatim, 100-year post-development flow rate that leaves your property on a small, they may not be so necessary. It gives the flexibility of the reviewers saying, based on your size of development, that's not so important on this project because you're not making adverse impact as defined in the drainage ordinance. And I can stand behind that if I got brought to court and said, why'd you say they didn't need that one little piece on their map? It's not black and white. That is the flexibility to show those things. Is a reason for that little, that was the intent of the last sentence. So right now, we review all the building permits that comes through Ascension Parish.
If you
In a
want-
small type project like this, we've had, I forgot what the site, it was just someone wanted a storage building,
Right.
a commercial site in a rural area. So I'm sorry, you're not exempt from the drainage study. You have to provide these things, but based on where you're located, based on what's going on, based on the roadside ditch, you already have to get a DOT drainage permit anyway. These are the things that make sense for your particular project. because you're not in a flood zone. There's no one around. You're in the middle of a field. That gave us the flexibility, and someone asked me, they provide a drainage study? Absolutely. They show they did not have adverse impact. They have these things. So they gave us the flexibility on that. Some of these things on the ERA, I mean, you would have to, I'm sorry, but I need to see, this is what a post-development map, you need to go find an engineer that does all of these things, shows the 100-year flow rate, talks about floodplain field mitigation. You're next to a bayou, do I need a HECRAS analysis? Is it at the 500-foot mark or 400-foot mark? You know, because that's, you know, if we were to bring this into the ordinance, because I have to be able to go to the planning commission or anyone, did they follow the ordinance? Yes, they followed it, but I had them in their own way in the drainage study get to that point. Now, the other way around, everyone's going up, don't care how small you are, snowball stand to a full development, a larger development.
It's a shed.
You don't have it takes a lot of flexibility away. Yeah. It really comes down to smaller ones. And so, if we were to take away that last sentence, I maybe talk to Melissa, maybe the flexibility that I'm thinking needs to be scalable. Some extra little languages, if that's what you want, would have to be within the actual items for the post-development drainage area map. Depending on size, the level of detail may be, you know, whatever, may need to change.
I would ask you to find the language that makes that happen, so that we are not putting restrictions on, you know, on homeowners who want to put a shed in their backyard. I mean, government's job is not to be intrusive.
That's covered, by the way. Sheds are all exempt.
Well, I get that, but
That's covered.
there's some reason this is.
Swimming pools are
You're right,
covered,
Terry.
sheds are covered, outbuildings
So-
are covered.
You're correct on your
What,
assumptions. There
what,
could be somebody.
what's gonna happen when we take this out? I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying, that this is gonna be a problem. If it's 5 or 6 times a year that they have to come to the drainage commission or the planning and zoning to get a waiver for that, you know, maybe that's not a real problem. And I would seek from Jerome information about that. But, you know, I don't want government to be so intrusive that people can't even move an outbuilding on their property. I mean, that just doesn't make sense, that they can't. I mean, what happens if they need to build a barn? Tell me.
That's on there.
It's on there.
They're exempt.
Well, like I
Unless it's
said,
on-
I'm
unless-
still not on those.
Commercial.
Terry, if you want to review that, I can yield the floor to Mr. Cagnolotti for a second,
Sure,
if that's all
and I
right with
can't
you.
find it
Mr.
in-
Cagnolotti.
Thank you, Chairman.
Where's the?
Yards, driveways, patios, swimming pools,
Move away from the mic,
outside
please,
barns.
Go ahead, Mr. Cagnolotti, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Look here.
It's wordsmithing, and I understand if you remove it completely,
That's what he was
it
thinking.
could cause situations that would be complicated. And I'm like Terry, if you can list specific items, but if you want to,
Look, there's barns.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just by way of discussion, some of the requirements of the drainage impact study policy,
Recreational vehicles.
put that word in there, may be reconsidered
Sheds,
in specific
other
situations,
outbuildings.
or in certain
Sir,
situations, if you want to call
One
that.
second, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Could you move your mic, sir? Away from, while you're speaking, just. if
Oh,
you
I
don't
didn't know
mind.
you were talking about.
I think the language with the word omitted is pretty harsh. So I'm just saying, if you consider some of the requirements of the drainage impact study policy may be reconsidered in certain or specific situations to be determined at the discretion of the engineering review agency, as long as sufficient proof is provided to show that the proposed development will not adversely affect any of the existing downstream drainage systems.
Well, that's what it says.
That's what it says, and what's sufficient, we're back to the argument about reasonable visitation, we're back to that now. That was the language Sean recommended, sufficient, remember?
So that's what
Sufficient-
that's
sufficient
what you
proof
do,
is
you do,
sufficient.
but that's
That's just-
your point.
That's what popped into my head.
Yes, Mr. Todd Lambert.
In the past, what hardships did y'all have that this would affect? Like, say, I don't know, maybe Jerome might, or the planning commission, say in the last year or so, you know,
There was,
with what's in the ordinance right now, and then if this wasn't in place to help,
Well, there's two things, we're not comparing the same things.
Yeah.
Right now, the drainage impact study policy was about 2 pages,
yeah.
okay? This policy, the new one that we have running, has very specific, more specific details that are listed on. So there's a combination of things you have to consider. So I had one project, it was a lady calling saying, I didn't realize this, but I have to get a building permit. All I want to do is put a shed on this building. I think she was off of Highway 30 somewhere. This is all I need to do. They're telling the building permit office that I have to have a drainage approval letter from you. I said, well, unfortunately, I always say the snowball thing. No matter how small you are, I'm sorry, you need to get a drainage study that addresses these requirements. I don't have enough money. I didn't know I needed this. Why I need an engineer? I've always owned the land. I just want to put a small shed up. I'm sorry. You're just those one small situations. You need to go find somebody. Do it. I said, go find your engineer before they do this work, so we'll talk about the project, see what they have to do. And they mentioned, I already have to get a DOTD culvert permit. All right, fine. So you're going to need some calculations, right? Do you need your watershed map? Yes. I need this. I need that. And I said, I'm sorry, but you do have to do a detention pond. There's no exemption to that. You have to show that you need some detention calculations. But these are the things that you need. I need a summary on this. This is what makes sense for your particular case, and I can stand behind that. So I gave me the flexibility. She still had to do a drainage study. I mean, had to get into a drainage study. Still had a watershed map. But taking photos up and downstream the entire roadside ditch, providing hydraulic capacity of that roadside ditch from DOTD, a lot of these little things that we're saying needs to be in here, if that were in place, I would be in a tough spot, said, I'm sorry, you need to go do every one of those things for your small application. So that's what my.
So the cost for that shed would be probably less to build that shed than what the,
Yeah. Probably instead of $2 grand, $3 grand study, it's probably $7, $8 grand.
right.
Well, we have an exemption for sheds.
Now, if it's commercial. This was a commercial, because it wasn't her house, or wasn't a residential area.
It was a business, something.
Yes, or it was just non-residential. That's usually the key word. If it's not residential, not agricultural, then you fall into the other category and you gotta produce something. Now, that is rare. It's not people building sheds all over the place,
Right.
but you just wanted one extreme example to show where sometimes that flexibility is needed. But a lot of times they realize the proof to prove that you don't need to provide anything is just as much level of effort as it is just to go ahead and do it. So a lot of times, if they go and go through the process, but there are those rare little situations where I like the flexibility of what DOTD does the same thing when they do drainage permits. Like, all right, based on the size of your development, what's going on, what was there before? Say the whole site was gravel before, it used to be an old building. It was there 2 years ago, it burned down. Now we're going back to a commercial use. There's a little flexibility in the policy for those types of situations.
I have a constituent that was told to go get a drainage study, and they went and get a drainage study, and they spent thousands of dollars, and then they were turned down later, you know, so, and this was somebody that didn't have a lot of money to be doing that, so I'm sure that there's cases in all, you know, in all directions. So,
Further discussion?
yes, Mr. Sadler.
17-503.A.3.4, excuse me, not point 3, point 4 reads as follows. The construction, improvement, or relocation of accessory buildings such as carports, sheds, barns, pool houses, recreational vehicle storage sheds, or other outbuildings constructed by a homeowner for his or her personal use, and here's the key language, and not for commercial or business purposes. So we're right there saying we don't want them to have it, and later on we're saying on a case-by-case basis we can approve a shed. I don't get it.
No, though we're saying we're not approved, you're still required.
This is an exemption. I didn't read the preliminary paragraph from the 17. These are things that are exempted. So we can exempt it for a residential person, for their pool, their carport, their shed, their outbuilding, storage of their recreational vision, all them things I read, but we wouldn't do that for a commercial person that's changing their carport, or I'm not sure a commercial guy would ever put a swimming pool in, but seems like we could throw a sentence in there where it says not for commercial, or for small commercial, well, I don't know, you're gonna get into issues there again, just like your significantly stuff.
Yeah, you have to start to find.
But what I've heard here tonight, by the way, is it's not really a problem. And I would just ask, how many snowball, I mean, you used the example, maybe you'd want to change it to a different one.
Yeah.
You probably do. You want a mulligan? How many snowball stands have come before us in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Small business?
I use,
Yeah, small business is the same thing.
I'm asking about snowball stands.
oh, I just use snowball stand for
I
it.
know you two use, that's why I'm asking. You said you want a mulligan. I'll let you take it back.
No, I was just say small commercial.
I first asked for specific examples, and then Terry asked you further, so I would assume that means you had appreciation for my initial question, and
Yeah.
you chose snowball stands. I mean, that is an extreme example, and I wouldn't want to do that either, but, and we're not being bothered by it, you know, if that really happens and this person complains before they spend that, let them come to the council and ask us for a variance. Or even see if they can get it at the Board of Adjustments, or is that appropriate to even go there? I don't know. Isn't that what they do, handle variances to someone?
I missed that question, sir.
What does our Board of Adjustments do
They will give variances to the zoning code,
only?
in the zoning code only. So if there's a setback requirement or something along those lines, they will give an adjustment or a variance to the zoning code itself.
Or square foot needed?
So what happens if
square
they
foot-
do that and took it to the Planning Commission? Can they do
The
that?
planning commission can give a variance to the planning matters, yes.
Right, because it's not a zoning matter.
Right, yeah.
Okay. My motion stands, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Sadler's motion stands. Ms. Cazzo, does your second stand?
No, I'm gonna let my second stand. I'm not thrilled with it, but
Okay.
I still don't feel like maybe I'm just being naive here, but I don't see the damage in this language as long as it is fairly utilized. But I can see how others might consider it a loophole who are of such a mind.
Call the question.
Yes, thank you, sir. I just want to remind everybody this is not the last time it's going to be in front of us. Okay, we have a motion and a second on a revision to remove the last sentence
Okay.
to the drainage impact study policy. Any objections? No objections? I object. Motion passes. Okay, we'll move on and we'll continue.
Do I still have the floor, Mr. Chairman? You asked me to start, and I gave you one. I said the second was
Yeah.
Ms. Couples' second question about policy code. Should we make
Sir, I
that
asked
into
you
law?
to start about 40 minutes ago.
Well, but it's one issue. I mean, I can't control how long you guys want to talk about it, in all fairness.
I'm sorry to be taking up your time, sir.
You didn't, but I was there 5 hours one day, and
Yeah.
you joined, and several
Yeah.
other members of this committee weren't
Yeah.
there, and I just feel like that's an important consideration. We've handled it now,
So
and the
I
next.
just want to clear up where we stand on this agenda, okay? So basically, right now, we're talking about the revision to the drainage impact study, and I may have taken B before A. If you look at the agenda, the A is revisions to Appendix 4 of the drainage. 5, I apologize. You know, so, I don't have a problem swapping A and B, but do we want to continue on that same path?
I was just trying to address Ms. Couples' question, and she
Sure.
happened to make it about that document, and
Yeah.
since they're both together on the agenda, I don't think she was given
Yeah.
time to address each one separately, but,
Well,
so her second point
You
was.
got the floor, sir.
Thank you, sir. Her second was, policy, and it's a point to me well taken, is not code. Should this policy statement become law? We have now learned that it is, and it's under Section 8 of Appendix 4, verbatim, at least in the 2 pages that we had before us, before Ms. Kennedy's firm, HNTB, edited the same, and before Mr. Dawson, myself, and you, Mr. Chairman, edited it for 4 or 5 hours Monday. And so I don't know if we have much more to address there, other than the fact that, I don't know, I wouldn't mind seeing it. I guess it's in a proper, I did ask the question, is it in a proper place, or does it need to be under 5, or what? And to be sure, I mean, Bill was gonna show this to me. He hadn't yet. If it really is under Section 8, then I have no problem with it being law, because you're telling me it is codified.
Yeah.
And by the way, the reason for that, I looked the definition up of policy for those that might want to really consider it. A policy is a plan to do something by a governing body a certain way. A law, of course, is law. And that doesn't say how you plan to do something, it says how you are going to do it. So, let's just be certain
And
here.
that's what we talked about when we discussed it. And so, can someone clarify what Mr. Saddle is saying? Do we actually have this? Is it law? Because we talked about changing the word from policy to procedure. So,
Speak up.
Mr. Dawson, you
I
wish to
don't-
speak?
Are you talking about 1745?
Yeah.
Where is it? Because I see there's drainage design and construction criteria, but I don't see the,
It needs to reference
What
this
I'm-
document.
yeah.
What I'm referring to is 17405I.
Right.
And under 17405I, it specifies
405I.
that the Department of Public Works and the ERA shall require a subdivider to provide a drainage impact study and a traffic impact study in this form and substance as provided in Appendix 4,
Sir?
Section 8.
Hold
And
up,
Appendix
Jerome.
4, Section 8 is part of the Unified Land Development Code, all right?
Mr. Dawson,
So if you go to Appendix 4, Section 8, you will find the first part of that is the typical street section that we require subdivisions to put in on their preliminary plats. The second part of that is the traffic impact policy. That's the recently adopted traffic impact analysis that that the council adopted last year. And after that is the drainage impact study that exists now, the two-pager, all right?
so it references this policy that we're amending tonight
Right.
in that.
And so if you adopt the changes to the policy as
Okay.
presented by HNTB, it will go into this section and it'll be, part of the ordinance.
Does that answer your question, fellas?
I think we'll have to.
I'm not looking, Bill says he can't find it. Is there a chance, Mr. Jerome, that you could put up on that overhead something that we clearly can't see, that you clearly do see?
I don't have the appendices.
And I don't have the expertise to even do what he's doing.
Oh, you need here?
See, this is 405 right here, drainage impact study and traffic study in accordance with Appendix 4, Section 8.
If I could get that, oh, you got it.
You gotta focus it a little bit, Jerome.
Appendix 4,
We
Section
can't,
8.
let it sit for a
Focus
second.
automatically.
I don't have any.
Okay, let me go here first. This is the cover page for our Unified Land Development Code.
Okay,
And it basically states, it shows you all of the different sections of our code. Zoning table, zoning code, the land use, subdivision code, and then item 8, right here, Appendix 4, item 8, is the subdivision code, section 8, all right?
all right.
So if you go, first off, let me go back to the subdivision code itself. Whoops. And we'll go to section for preliminary plat submittals. This will come down here. This is 17405. I'll go all the way down to
To
section
I.
I. This is section I right here. And it states, the Department of Public Works and the Engineering Review Agency shall require a subdivider to provide a drainage impact study and a traffic impact study in the form and substance as provided in Appendix 4, Section 8, right? So we go to Appendix 4, Section 8, that's this. You'll see the first part of this is the typical road section. We require that on all the preliminary plats.
Hang on, let's see, he's gonna put it.
The second part of it Attachment A is the traffic impact analysis policy. That's the one that we adopted last year. And then attachment B is a drainage impact study, and that's the existing one right now. That's the two-pager, all right? And
Wait,
that's
wait,
the
wait,
one
wait,
that's
wait.
being modified.
Right,
Could you bring that back up and expand it a little bit and show
go
us?
back to the place where it referenced,
It just references, it's not in the code.
right
though.
there, the drainage
Well,
impact.
by references. in
This
it.
is the drainage impact study policy.
That's,
This
that,
gives all the details on how Sean reviews, and these are how the traffic impact, the drainage impact studies are to be.
so that is the
That
document.
is the existing
That's
policy.
the document.
That's the existing policy.
And that is the document that's in our packet tonight that Melissa has done revisions on.
Right.
Yes.
And we did revisions
expanded
on
greatly
Monday.
upon, yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's greatly expanded from 2 pages to like
So
7 or
once,
whatever.
if you adopt this, if the council adopts this
Which means,
fully-
you have satisfied Ms. Gupple's question.
Yeah. it's
Thank
already-
you.
It's already in there, all right, thank you.
All right. Any other discussion on revisions to the drainage impact study policy?
Go over the rest of it.
This one we've been on. I'm on B, okay? All right, that's what we've been talking about. Any other questions on that, since that's what we've been hashing out, based on the speaker's questions?
We'll let other people talk.
Yeah. All right,
Okay, if they don't, I do have a comment.
really?
A little louder, Randy. Really? Really? Did you say really?
Really?
In front of me is drainage impact study policy in black. The word policy is stricken out, and what we had agreed Monday to at least present to this group tonight was that it would be replaced with procedure, P-R-O-C, with an E added. There's a typo, I think, there, in red, but that is struck out too. So is this going to appear now as a drainage impact study procedure? And as I understand it, if we send it out of committee tonight, we are recommending it will be added like traffic impact study. I don't know if it's still called a policy or a procedure, to our code in the appropriate appendix? And if so, where exactly will it reside? My two questions. Did you want me to repeat that?
I'll try to address that, Councilman Satterley.
Thank you, sir.
Whatever you call it, policy or procedure, we can modify the language, all right? So whatever you want to call it,
No, it's not
we'll
normal.
call it. And it will be placed in that appendix that I just showed you, all right?
17405I.
Exactly, in the place of the existing policy that we have now.
And it will be, the document I have in my packet tonight, page 1, it says, before I think you were saying it's 2 of 5.
It's not yours.
Actually, the last page says page 6 of 5. That's probably a little messed up. It's probably page 6 of 6, maybe. But all 6 of those pages, with the last sentence that this committee just voted to strike, will be placed in that appendix. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have at it. Help me here, I'm dying, man.
If we had another markup, Jessica, the markup, the Doc Randy markup, where is it? Is this it?
Yes. It's your version, then. It's changed.
The document that's in front of us has HMTB's recommendations.
Accepted as,
This document, well, you've got that, but this document has the result of the session that
Yeah.
we had.
There's a second document I think
Right.
everybody's got.
Drainage impact study, and this is where the mays and shalls are switched, et cetera.
Yes. And
so are we discussing and gonna be voting on what's in Novus or what Mr. Dawson just
Well,
spoke
Just
of?
adopted, well, he didn't, but.
We didn't adopt.
This is the HNTB recommendations. This is the revisions that came out of the session to the HNTB
So we're going to be voting twice,
What
or?
I- Yeah, well, not necessarily.
Okay.
We can vote once on the, on suggested changes, okay? So just to make it clear to everyone here that you have a copy of what HMTV worked on to revisions to the drainage impact study policy. And after review by Mr. Dawson, Mr. Satterley, and myself sat in, that we looked at some of the stuff, and one of the things was procedure, but, and also we have a revision tonight to strike the last sentence, but there was also several places in there that we may have changed the shall, I mean, the may to shall, and things like that, and we also,
Well, just say the thought was when we did this, that first would be considered the HNTB amendments.
right,
Or changes. They could either be adopted as submitted, or they could be amended. And then this would be as considered as a document as a whole to amendments to that previously adopted.
Right.
I'm good with that.
Okay.
So that, you know, on agenda item number 6B, drainage impact study policy, the chair would entertain a motion to accept the HMTB changes.
With the
With
one
amendments.
amendment that you have already.
The one amendment that we have,
Well, that's already
and
done.
that's already done.
Correct.
So the chair would entertain a motion.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
To accept the HMTB changes. We have a motion by Mr. Satterley. Do we have a second? We have a second by Mr. Todd Lambert. Discussion. Do we need any discussion, any clarification by any member up here?
Clarification, this is a motion that I made to recommend this to the full
To the full
council.
council, that is correct.
Correct.
That's what we do as committee.
So without the other edits?
There'll be a
proposed?
second vote on that.
Okay, sorry.
Yes. All right. So we have a motion and a second to move to the full council, the HMTB recommendations of the drainage impact study policy. Any objection? That motion passes. So we have cleared agenda item 6B to go to the council. We'll move on to,
If you wanted to consider the session proposed amendments to that document that you just adopted,
we can do that.
yeah.
So at this time, the chair would entertain a motion to move to the full council the suggested revisions of the HMTB recommendations to the full council.
Correct.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion by Ms. Cazzo,
Second.
We'll give it to Johnny.
second by Mr. Cagnalotti. Any objection?
Just discussion real
question.
quick.
Question, need clarification for sure. Go ahead, Ms. Cazzo.
Melissa, I was just concerned. You wrote this. I have confidence in you. Why did you use the term should instead of the term shall?
It was already in there that way, so I just left it.
Yeah.
Okay. so
Same
this-
with the,
You don't see
policy.
that, we're not creating
No.
anything cumbersome
I don't
here?
have, no, I have no issue with those changing to shall.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Cagnalotti.
Just, also, are these strikeouts in the watershed map and permit map, those strikeouts are also amendments? Or were those stricken by
I don't have it
HMTV?
in front of me.
No. What document are you looking at, sir? Which page, what document?
Page 2 of 6 on the,
You on the drainage impact study policy,
correct.
page 2 of 6, watershed
At the
map.
very
Where'd
top,
that come from, Jeff?
Those are HMTV.
Okay.
That's HMTB.
that's HMTV,
So that's going
strict,
forward.
strict, okay.
Yes, going
Okay.
forward.
No problem.
That's already gone, yeah.
It's only the red.
Yeah.
Okay,
Any-
I'm okay with it.
Okay. Any other discussion? Mr. Satterley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And on these shells, there exist several, but since we're concentrating right now on page I think it's 2 of 6, okay? There's a third bullet underneath the topic of hydrologic design, and it reads, the impact of the 100-year design storm. It's 100-year. Shall instead of should also now, shall be checked. So now we have to do that for maximum water surface elevation and total site runoff peak discharge rates to allow our ERA, Engineer Review Agency, person to assess the impact on properties and infrastructure. Okay, so the shall did it, do it, bad English. What now? Are we just collecting, one of the comments that Councilman Dawson and I had is a data point, or is it a useful data point to have? My comment is always very simple. When I was a chicken doctor, and I said I was going to weigh chickens at 16 weeks of age, somewhere in my materials and methods, analogous to this document, anybody reading my paper would expect me to have a table or a histogram or a line graph or something showing what was that weight, and for me to interpret that weight, that body weight, and say it means this. So a lot of times we seem to be collecting, and this is not the only time throughout the document, 100-year storm data. Why are we doing that? What do we do with it? What are the consequences after we do it if we find out it says something and I don't know what it says? Is Mr. Dawson asked me just a data point, and therefore to me an academic exercise going to my former life, or is it useful?
In general,
i.e., do we need it in the code at all?
I'd say yes, I recommended it. It's to make sure, it's a check to make sure you're not causing adverse impacts.
But if you're already checking at 10 and 25, isn't 100 even more stringent? And if it is, what do you do? I mean, we're not in this law forcing them to go to 100-year anywhere.
No, and it's not, your pond design doesn't require a 100-year.
Correct. Capacity doesn't require
Your
it.
capacity of your subsurface system does
Right.
not.
Correct.
But you want to make sure that if you have the 100-year flowing, you're not shooting out manhole lids, or that you're impacting neighbors downstream with the 100-year.
So your answer is the data is useful. So now let's say
Yes.
it comes out like that and you're shooting off a manhole cover. What do you do about it?
The most,
Because the law don't say, if it does this, shoots off a manhole, this is what's going to happen.
the most useful application of the 100-year analysis is when a project is along a major stream. Okay, so we're wanting to see the 100-year analysis, make sure we're not adversely impacting upstream, which is increasing water surface.
Correct. But if you are, then what do you do?
Then you would say the review comment is, you are not meeting the drainage ordinance, you're showing adverse impact according to certain station.
But the ordinance doesn't say about, it just says to assess impact. It don't say anything about it being adverse.
Your drainage ordinance,
Well, this sentence doesn't. It says to assess impact. You're doing it to assess the impact. Now you determine it's adverse. Where does it tell the developer now, you can't do this now because it's adversely impacting it, other than you making a review comment?
Your ordinance requires no adverse impact.
right.
So it will reference, all of these shalls then, you're telling me will reference somewhere else in the ordinance where you shall produce no adverse impact.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Your
Can you show me that sentence?
In the ordinance?
Yes, ma'am. Well,
It's a race.
it's not an ordinance, it's a policy, but it's fixing to be an ordinance, I think.
No, but I'm saying the policy is to ensure that the people are meeting the intent of the ordinance.
So somewhere.
And that requirement is in the ordinance
Yes,
about
ma'am.
no adverse impact.
So somewhere in Appendix 5, it's going to say that?
Yes.
Like sort of a physician do no harm statement?
Yes.
Okay, well, Mr. Chairman, I won't go through the 3 shells that are on page 3 as well, and others that Mr. Dawson and I,
It's,
and you all have no problem with changing the shoulds to shall.
Can I get some credit for finding this?
Can I ask you this, and I don't mean to embarrass anyone that might have missed it, or the original people, that whoever they are, undefined, wrote these codes. There was a particular sentence, I don't have it in front of me, where a certain step is taken and another step is taken. At that point, we ask the developer to please check with a state watchdog agency.
I remember reviewing that.
And, I promised Bill I'd behave. In my margin notes, I wrote, come on, man. I mean, in law, we don't ask politely, because suppose impolitely the developer says, no, thank you. And, maybe you missed that, Melissa, whatever, but I hope the document, I can't find it right now. I was looking for it. It doesn't say please anymore.
I had it, Doc, so.
It's been fixed? I can't tell because a lot of track changes have been accepted.
The one I wrote on.
Because at least the way of this committee will be, if we vote in a minute and say we recommending this, hope I'm recommending by my vote the elimination of the word please. It had to do with, help me, Bill, something to do with
It was LPDS.
100, LPDS, 100,000 versus 200,000
It
measurements.
was saying that you please contact DEQ regarding stormwater permits
The
or
reference to the permit
LPDS.
number?
Might have been a
And
reference.
that was in that same
A
paragraph.
reference to a department.
Do you know where it is, Jessica?
Yes.
Oh, the drainage artist, page
On the
11?
drainage.
Yes.
That's why I grabbed it. I had a note on it.
The reason that's in there, because that's the specific state number of the permit and the requirements that are needed to meet that.
And we into another document right now that we're gonna get into.
Oh.
Yeah.
And we
Oh,
hadn't finished the vote
okay.
yet, but.
And I noticed now it's got strike-throughs that
But-
wasn't there when I had it, but we'll get.
But I guess the attention was made to the word
Strike-through
please,
gets rid of
okay?
please.
The attention was made to the word please.
Okay, I've got it.
You know what I mean? You
Yes,
got
I've got it.
Melissa, you know,
No, that's not a strike-through.
Yeah.
'Cause
so,
we had it this way.
so anyway. So we're back to the document.
I'm done, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. So we have a vote to send amendments.
You've got a motion and a second, Mr.
Got a
Chairman.
motion and a second. Any objection? You got that, Jessica? Thank you, ma'am. With that being said, we'll move back to agenda item number 6A, revision to Appendix 5, drainage. Let me open that up. Melissa and Sean, does anybody would like to give a review of what the major changes that you proposed in here?
Sure. The major changes here were the detention requirement to change from 25 to
From
codify the
10
25-year with the 10-year release rate, to clarify some of the fill requirements, to update, it actually made a lot of changes to the fill requirements.
Right.
Basically, we left the individual lots less than a half acre as is. We revised individual lots greater than a half acre to match what the individual lots were with less than half acre. And then we clarified everything else we put into a section called for non-individual lot development, which made the requirements on fill limited to 3, and you have to mitigate, essentially.
Yeah. There you go.
And then we added some of the requirements regarding how to do that fill mitigation and what you need to do to meet that requirement. And then we added a number of definitions to the ordinance.
Yep, stack up. Okay. So, does any committee member have a question for HMTB? Yes, Mr. Sadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Melissa, and for all your hard work on this and the editing, and I like a ton of it in this document. I'll say that up front. I want to be sure that, I've asked you before about pier and beam construction, and I see you haven't added any, and I don't fault you for that, because it doesn't seem to me when I read the document, maybe something I should have did a while back, in the detail I've read it now, it's not needed because it's already there. Is that not correct? In other words, what I read in here, let's say you want to bring under case X, Y amount, 3 feet of fill, the maximum amount allowed, and you're still underneath the BFE requirement, and you gotta come up on piers now, this document already says that you have to now combine dirt with pier and beam. Is that not correct?
Correct.
So we already had what I wanted. Now my question becomes, and this doesn't affect you, we just need to be enforcing it. Is that correct? Would that be your opinion?
My opinion is on the residential properties, the individual lots, that was correct. And somehow on the development, there was ambiguity that was allowing more fill.
Right.
And that's what we were trying to clarify.
But I'm not asking that. So, but let's say we now have 3 feet and they need to come 2 more or 3 more feet and they're forced to go in pier and beam. If they
That's-
build it not without the pier beam anyway and we approve it, our law would have been broken. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the onus becomes on us, Mr. Dawson, Mr. Jerome, to be sure that we're looking at these developments and be sure that, well, obviously now we're not gonna allow more than 3 feet. And if they do use 3 feet and they need to go higher to meet the other codes of BFE, that they are building pier and beam. Okay?
Or chain wall.
Or chain wall.
Or chain, correct.
Right. Well,
Something besides
I
dirt.
don't want to get into technicals about that. My understanding of pier and beam is putting something up on pilasters, whether it be cinder blocks filled with rebar and cement and so forth. And chain wall just means underneath that foundation, you connect all of those weight points, if you will, together to that piling, up into the air. So what I found when I had my home lifted in Slidell, where I live, Mr. Chairman.
What you what?
Where I live. I had 3 people estimated, and I won't drop their names, professional engineers, 3 different prices, because FEMA allowed me to do that and pick whichever I want. One of the persons didn't include a chain wall, and the other 2 did. And of course, with a chain wall, it's much more expensive. I actually went with the middle bid, et cetera, but that's where it was explained to me that those really aren't the same things. So to be clear, I'm talking about the structure that elevates you in the air, pier and beam, and it's there. And we're cool if we enforce that law. Now, there's a lot of sections in here too where, are we gonna do this in 2 stages again, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman?
buddy.
Okay, so I'll hold water where they're docking and Randy and Bill corrections, and then there's, of course, HNTB corrections. So I'll start the ball out again and roll and say, I would make the motion, Mr. Chairman, that we recommend to the full council to accept the HNTB's recommendations as in our packets here, strike-through language as well as additionally new language.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Satterley, send to the full council, the HMTB recommendations. In addition to the new language,
No, we said we're gonna vote twice. I'm
Right,
just, I'm
that's
trying to
why-
get,
that's why I'm
if everybody can deal with
clearing it with you, 'cause
that.
you said something
People may
that-
hate what Bill and I are saying, but they might love what HNTB is
Yeah,
saying.
that's what I'm
They're
saying.
professionals, we're,
we have a
No.
motion to send forward to the full council the recommendations as brought forward by HMTB. We have a motion by Mr. Satterley, a second by Mr. Todd Lambert. Any discussion? Any opposition? That motion carries. The chair would open for discussion or recommendations on further review, recommendations going forward to the full council.
You've got, that should be in, you got those? They were handed out, so,
Yeah.
okay.
They were in purple.
is this the document? This was handed out to me. Can you recognize it?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Jessica,
Mr.
is that the ones
Kegley.
that have the corrections in purple?
Kept this procedure.
Yeah, it's hard to see, but
It's hard to see.
those
It looks
edits
like
were
it's changed.
inserted by Jessica in purple on the copy that we were handed
Got
out
it,
tonight.
Doc?
Well,
Can you see
I
the
tell you how I
purple?
can tell if we're involved in, let me look for the please. I do see it on page 11 of 17.
You know where you know the key points you looked at.
Yeah, some of them, but so that one's there, I'm sure, I trusted all of them are. So we're gonna get rid of LAR 100,000, LAR 2,000, and in so doing, get rid of please, that whole sentence, and now it's just gonna say, I think this was Councilman Dawson's language, the contractor shall comply with all federal and state laws, specifically LPDES. One of the comments Bill had of that was an education for me, and I thought it was a good one. LPDS, like you all were talking about a minute ago about a method, HECRIS, wasn't LPDS not too long ago. It was a different abbreviation or acronym.
NPDES.
Right, so, but it's in there right now, because like I said, I like the law for what we have right now, and we can come change it if they change their name again. But you guys are happy with the Doc Dawson change, if you will? Let me give him senior authorship. The Dawson Doc change. We were mostly after the please, by the way, but Bill, as I said, elaborated, why not just say federal, state laws, especially the LPDES, is all that language in there necessary? Do y'all see it? It's on page 11 of 17, sort of like 3/4 way down on the page.
You talking about paragraph C?
Paragraph
Or
B.
Paragraph B.
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 Did they have a chance to review that? Did y'all have a chance?
I did.
Okay.
My only recommendation would be to leave the reference number of the actual permit. Just
That's a-
because that
that's the document.
outlines the requirements regarding what they need to do.
LAR 10,000.
I don't have a problem with that, Bill.
20,000.
10,000.
But we would get rid of please.
Yes.
And we would chase it, so it's not in our copy, since if the line goes back in with the LAB 100,000 and LAR 200,000, without please to be English and grammatically correct, we'll need shall contact. Yep.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's understood that who's doing the contacting there? Well, the sentence doesn't tell you that, but I would guess that's who they're talking about. It would say all these sites will be covered under general, inserted from HNTB as LDEQ permit, LAR 100,000 or LAR 200,000, please contact. We're going to change that to shall contact, but who's the person that shall make the contact?
It's either the contractor.
Right, I know who it is,
The
but
applicant.
can we clear it up and state that in there somewhere, or? Like, maybe a comma after LAR 200,000, the applicant shall contact LDEQ for specific requirements for each permit? After the LAR 200,000, comma, the applicant shall, instead of the word please, contact LDEQ for specific requirements for each permit.
Okay.
Is that okay with HNTB and Sean?
Yes.
Sean, you good with that? Okay. Let the record show he nodded in the affirmative. Let's see.
Jessica, you can get that? And that is part of your motion, sir?
Yes, let me see if there's anything else.
See
I
if there's
think
anything
that's it. Oh, there was one other thing, and it's not a real big issue to me one way or another. There are a couple titles, like 175013 on page 14 of 17, that have a heading like drainage impact study. Oh, I see what's gonna happen there. That's where we're gonna stick
That's
the
gonna-
procedure.
that's
So
gonna
that will go
that's
away
it.
as far as being a heading with nothing
Yeah,
behind
we
it.
talked about that a little bit.
Right, but I think wasn't there one more somewhere, Bill, that had a heading but nothing under it?
Well, we're gonna have to change that reference for the drainage impact study, 'cause it's in a different place now.
Right, we've already figured out where it's at.
Yeah. So we
So-
gotta just change the reference in here to go to, what, section 8 or whatever.
And I just want to remind everybody, thank y'all for your patience, all the committee members.
Oh, yeah.
is that we've got another shot, several more shots.
Right,
At
that's
the
real
I's
good.
and the T's on
Right.
this thing.
The second one, Mr. Chairman, that I did see is 175090. It says administration and enforcement,
Yeah,
and there's nothing under it.
well, apparently there's none. Just a joke.
Do we just keep, sir,
Just a joke,
with
sir.
all due respect, do we just keep the title?
Yeah,
or-
should that, is there somewhere
Is there
reference?
intention to add language there,
I'm- I'm
Mr. Sherrill?
Yeah,
or-
I'm gonna go ahead and ask the question on 175090, we talked about
Page
yesterday.
14.
Administration and enforcement, and there's actually no verbiage written there. Is that referenced
see it.
somewhere else, or?
You wanna see it?
I can bring you a copy of it, Jerome. You wanna look at it?
Yeah.
Let me,
Well, you did have variances underneath it.
Variances comes under that?
well, what is,
Oh,
what
no,
is
it
this?
doesn't. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm just saying, and it's blank. There's nothing that it references to even reference you back to another place.
1750-93?
Nothing.
Well, there's no 1750.
No, you're correct, there's nothing under there.
And look, it's just a document that's written, and that's why we're hashing it out.
It should
I'm
say
looking at for
Ascension Parish Engineer Review Agent
175093.
instead of review agent.
No, I'm looking at
5090.
17-5090.
Oh, administrative enforcement. There's nothing there.
So does that need to be there? I mean, what's,
Is there gonna be something?
is there gonna be some administration and enforcement? No, I mean,
Because
why?
5092 is
Second,
fines
might
and
be abbreviated
enforcement.
already, you're right.
If you look at 5092, Randy.
I don't have a problem moving this forward tonight, and so,
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Mr. Sadler
Yes.
and committee members, we're finding out that this is just a line right here.
Yes, sir.
And I don't have a problem with, personally, don't have a problem with moving it tonight, because the people that have drafted it have figured out that it's just a line there.
And we have many more stabs at that. I don't know,
Yeah.
probably. Okay, my final question, Mr. Chairman, is 1750-93 is another Dawson Dock gem. It's an addition. Long-term accountability was a concern of ours, and we've added language, and I want to be sure Melissa and Sean, our ERA rep, y'all cool with this? Developer of the HOA, and we probably ought to add that to definition and spell out what that means. That's, I think, homeowners association.
Yes.
Shall maintain a bond sufficient to ensure the maintenance of the privately owned stormwater detention, retention, or mitigated structures, parentheses, pounds. And that was a co-worked on sentence with legal counsel because Mr. Parrington had joined us at that point in time because we just originally had detention. We had a retention mitigation structures within the development. The second sentence, the amount of the bond shall be established by the Ascension Parish. It says review agent. If I had my druthers, I'd rather say engineering review agent
ERA.
or by Ascension Parish.
I think Ascension Parish should do, we talked about that.
So we would strike the go with Ascension Parish and get rid of review agent.
Yep.
And then we would define HOA in our definitions
Okay, so we have a motion that stands by Mr. Sadlerly
with a bunch of corrections. I believe.
with
We had a
with
question.
his corrections to move forward to the full council. We have a second by Mr. Todd Lambert on revisions to Appendix 4, 5 of drainage. I keep wanting to say 4. 5 of drainage. Any objection? Yes, please.
The one that the revision, 17, 15, 13, drainage impact study, y'all are gonna put it there, so are we striking now, because it's already in
Well,
that
I
other
think you're
section?
gonna have to put that, in the section that it's currently in the code, which is 4-8, section 8.
Yeah.
Reluctant to say section 8.
Where the line was inserted, it was actually, that document
Yeah.
is referred to in the code. So
Okay.
it will have to be,
That needs to be,
and I'm gonna have,
I'm gonna have to go and search and change all those references.
I'm gonna have to ask that some homework be done predominantly by the two co-authors of the amendments to make sure that you understand what all the change, what we're talking about here tonight.
Jessica, just send that to Bill and I, and we'll shoot you back an answer that we're fine with it.
And then we'll check next week to see if they made any other.
I think Melissa has a question.
I have a question. 175091 variances, you crossed that out.
Yeah, we took it out completely.
And that's part of the motion.
Okay.
Thank you for the clarification.
Well,
Mr. Chairman, which she said is part of my motion.
17019,
5091 variances.
5091, okay.
That is being struck.
Yeah. Commercial. This is not hard. Drainage could have done it.
Oh, they said take them.
Being struck. Let's see the big squeeze.
Okay.
And that was the entire
Fee, not a procedure.
paragraph. And that's on the second motion, but you got that. All right, that motion passed. I don't remember if I wrapped the gavel on that one or not. So, given that,
Okay.
we'll move to agenda item number 7. Proposed ordinance to impose temporary restrictions on the placement of fill for major and minor subdivisions, given what we've been through.
Make a
You
motion
object,
to,
well, do we even have a motion for this?
Yep, Mr. Chairman, point of order was brought by Mr. Lawler, who at the time was part of this committee, but is no longer, so there's no one to defend it. So I think what we're going to need is someone to say, we don't want it, if that is the pleasure of this committee.
I don't believe it was brought when he was part of this.
Yes, it was.
Brought in 2019, huh?
I was chair when he brought this.
Okay, I didn't remember that. Okay, so in other words, is it maintained on the agenda since
Yes, it was
2018?
deferred each time, and it's in parentheses, you'll
Okay.
notice his name, and since he's not in the courtroom this evening,
What is your clarification that we?
I would think that since he's not here to make a motion in the affirmative for it, then we can either make it for him, any member of this committee who is allowed to motion and vote, which is 4 of us plus Ms. Casso, not Mr. Dawson, or we can make a motion, which I think Todd is eager to do, to say we don't want to have a fill moratorium restriction in lieu of, I don't want to put words in his mouth, what we just did on drainage impact study and floodplain management, Appendix 5.
I make that motion that
We have a motion by Mr. Lambert that we do not impose a temporary restriction on the placement of fill for major and minor subdivisions.
I'll second that.
We have a second by Mr. Sadler. Any objection? Any discussion? Motion passes. We'll move on to agenda item number 8.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Sadler, second by Mr. Cagney.